thank you for coming back. I noticed there's another person in the amongst us, so welcome. Gwen, I think, is that right? Gwen. Okay, thank you, welcome. We continue now with this theme on building peace on the ground, sharing of good practices, and this panel is on challenging affluence and overcoming poverty. And the first speaker I'd like to invite, the first speaker is Father Stephen Fernandes. There's a whole list of things that he's been involved in, but only since 2000 onwards, so there's probably a lot more before that. But he's the Senior Resident Professor of Ethics in Moral Theology at St Pius X College in Mumbai. He's National Secretary for the Conference of Catholic Bishops of India and the Commission for Doctrine and Theology since 2010, and a theological consultant for that organisation between 2001 and 2006. He's National Secretary of the Office of Justice and Peace, the Catholic Bishops Conference of India since 2015, National Ecclesiastical Advisor of all things, the Catholic Nurses Guild of India since 2013. He was appointed Catholic theologian on Baptist and Catholic dialogue from the Pontifical Council for promoting Christian unity from the Vatican earlier this year, July this year. And he has presented research papers on social ethics, medical ethics, justice and peace, ethical concerns at the local, national and international conferences. I'm sure that doesn't cover everything that he's been doing and involved in, but he will tell us now. Welcome. Thank you, Father Stephen.
So I want to thank first PAX Christi International for inviting me here. It's so nice to be here. Such a wonderful days we're having of great fulfillment, reflection. It's so nice, So here is the theme there, challenging affluence, overcoming poverty as the starting point, but it's based with the overall theme of, the thing is regarding a lot of issues of injustice, discrimination, and where we are right now at this present moment. By way of introduction, I would like to say, on being a powerful witness, because that is something key to our lives. Our mission and our witness is ineffectual if not lived. And that's what we are all here for. Each one of us is called to rebuild society by going out of our comfort zones and reaching out to the peripheries. That's words of Pope Francis himself. And so we are called to be involved in the struggles of humanity. The fulfillment of our lives, to go a little more deeper into the issues, is found in love and self-giving, and not self-assertion and selfishness. That's what we see today around many people in society. Missionary outreach is a clear sign of the maturity of our communities. Our social efforts need the inward experience of God, and that's why we have so much reflection, so much prayer, and also the outward practice of justice, mercy and truth. So a balance between both. And so the witness of our life is the most powerful and extremely important means of letting our life shine forth. That's just by way of introduction. And so the most effective way of witness is through the promotion of justice, solidarity and peace, and that's what PAX Christi International, PAX Christi, the regional conferences, that's what we all are doing. We are further called to serve others, and in doing so, recognize Christ in the least of our sisters and brothers. Acts of service, such as providing education, healthcare, relief services, acts of justice and advocacy, are an integral part of witnessing of the gospel. And so our mission will mean threefold dialogue. Dialogue with local cultures, with other religious traditions, and with the poor. How in fact can one proclaim the new commandment of love without promoting injustice and peace, the true and authentic advancement of the human person? This question was asked many years back in Evangelii Nunciandi of Blessed Pope Paul VI. Towards sustainable peace through active non-violence. That's also part of our theme there, our main heading, and that's why I want to take that as the starting point for our discussion today. Blessed Pope Paul VI stated that the world must be educated to love peace, to build it up and to defend it. Peaceful coexistence should become part of the consciousness of individuals and people. And in fact, this year Pope Francis gave the 50th World Day message of peace, and he chose at the same theme, non-violence, a style of politics for peace. Every human heart wants peace. There's no human being who says, I do not want peace. That's the final lasting desire of every human heart. Pope Francis, peace building through active non-violence is the natural and necessary complement of the Church's continuing efforts to limit the use of force by the application of moral norms. Next. Active non-violence is the way of showing that unity is truly more powerful and more fruitful than conflict. So what's the opposite of conflict? Is unity. We are all called here to build bridges of communion and break barriers of division, of conflict. So let us then urge people everywhere to build peace through active and creative non-violence. An indispensable principle of building friendship is unity is better than conflict, and so we need to be more and more involved in non-violent peace-building strategies in various countries, including Asia. In fact, Emeritus Pope Benedict XVI underlined the only way to counter too much violence, too much injustice in society is with more love and more goodness. So our response to violence is not violence. Our response to violence is love, goodness. That's our response. Mahatma Gandhi, I naturally bring in because coming from India, declared non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of humankind. It is mightier than the mightiest weapons of destruction devised by the ingenuity of the human person. And that's our approach. Destruction, therefore, is not the law of humans, but non-violence. We go next. Ghaffar Khan, to an interview in 1985, stated, today's world is traveling in some strange direction. You see, the world is going towards destruction and violence. And the speciality of violence is to create hatred among people, to create fear. In the morning we spoke about fear and all that. I am a believer in non-violence, and I say that no peace or tranquility will descend upon the people of the world until non-violence is practiced, because non-violence is love and it stirs courage in people. The beautiful words of this man. Dr. Martin Luther King, naturally we must speak about him when we speak of non-violence. There's in each of us the inexhaustible potential for doing good. In a world filled with violence, strife, war, hate and terrorism, we have the moral obligation to struggle and to counteract it with a non-violent revolution and creative and active non-violent acts of love and mercy. And I've given some quotation in the notes there, where you can read more of him, really beautiful thoughts of Martin Luther King. Next. And so it's very necessary, the root cause of violence and war need to be constantly studied and analyzed. St. Pope John Paul reminded us, at the root of war are usually real and serious grievances. Yesterday we were doing study, root analysis, causes, etc. Injustice suffered, legitimate aspirations frustrated, poverty, exploitation of the multitudes of desperate people who see no real possibility of improving their lot by peaceful means. These are really very wise words. And so now when we come back now to justice and peace, on the one hand, we need to eliminate the causes of situations of injustice, which lead people to desperate and violent acts. And on the other hand, we need to educate people to respect human life. And here we have the beautiful words of John Paul II. It says, to reach peace, teach peace. To reach peace, to prepare for a better humanity, we have the task and duty to teach people ideals of truth, justice, love and freedom. And I think in a big way we were doing that yesterday to all the experiences we went through, all our sessions. Overcoming poverty. Now we come to the theme, the actual theme of the presentation. The world continues to be divided between people of wealth and people of hunger. This year, 2017, is the 25th anniversary of the declaration of the UN General Assembly, having 17 October as the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. However, poverty still has a grim face today. Leaders, policy makers need to put in place appropriate social protection systems and measures that cover everybody, especially the most vulnerable. See, we must reach out to the last and the least. That's the goal. Globally, 746 million people are living in extreme poverty. And India has the largest number of people in extreme poverty, 218 million. Africa having the largest number of people living in extreme poverty, that is 383 as a continent, 383 million, followed by Asia, 327 million people living in extreme poverty, just to give you an idea. So, all the root causes of poverty must be traced and removed. Food insecurity, lack of safe drinking water, threatened by privatization of water, which we are fighting there in Asia and India, environmental degradation and climate change, loss of biodiversity and ecosystems, emission of greenhouse gases, lack of healthcare and effects of nuclear use continue to keep people in poverty. So these are the causes of poverty in Asia and also in India. So everyday experience and scientific research shows the gravest effects of all attacks on the environment are suffered by the poorest. It's not the rich who are suffering this. It's the poor people who are suffering all this environmental degradation. So now, therefore, the sharing of good practices which is there, the CBCI Office of Justice, Peace and Development, JPD, seeks to play a key role in the Church in India by manifesting a solidarity with the poor, the marginalized, the victims of discrimination and injustice, and all those facing human rights violations. It attempts to carry out its objectives of building a just and peaceful society through various awareness programs and peace-building activities which we shall now see. For example, we have Justice Sunday celebrated every year in the whole of India, all the parishes, and our center is, the CBCI, we send them material, posters, programs, what they can do, how to make it effective. So this is celebrated, Sunday after Independence Day, 15th August in India is Independence Day, the next Sunday. And every year there's a special theme, a special message with a liturgy, points for homily, and also for superior seminaries. So the whole of India celebrates it, because we want to show collaboration with justice efforts, collaboration with, for example, this year a theme was non-violence, the theme we had. So the day is marked by special masses all over the dioceses of India, the country, enabling the faithful to reflect on the theme. Action plans, peace marches, and some parts of the country they have organized regularly to show the solidarity for fighting for justice. Right to Food campaign is still going on. It began in 2008, again the CBCI Commission Justice and Peace. The objective to create awareness of the right to food for all, which must reach the marginalized and the rural poor. The scheme is essential commodities are distributed, midday meals for children, maternity benefit schemes, old age pension schemes, other schemes. This shows the government has a duty to care for the poor. And this we want to point out more and more. Because sometimes we find that they evade and they do not really care for the poorest of the poor. The Right to Food campaign is still being carried out today. Next. To give food to the hungry is a big concern for all of us. And we must strive for a world free of hunger. And that's what we put yesterday in the chart, 20, 30 years down the line, remember, we said food for all. The structural causes of hunger in the world must be eliminated. And agricultural development of poor countries must be promoted, because the countries like India, we're dependent on rain, dependent on agriculture 60-70%. No rain, there's droughts, too much rain, there's floods, and then the food is affected, farmers commit suicide, these are the effects. Government should be encouraged to allocate financial resources to agricultural research, because they're using old methods, in many parts of India. So, should use new methods to develop technologies. Farmers should have access not only to seeds and fertilizers, but to productivity, increasing farming technologies, rural finance, etc. Next point, miracle of peace. If you want peace, reach out to the poor. And so the conflicts around the world, more refugees, rising poverty, there's a lack of respect for the dignity of rights of every human being. So what is needed is solidarity, especially with the poorest of the poor. That's what we're talking about. And if we want no justice, no peace. If we want peace, work for justice. And if we want justice, work for solidarity. So it's a big call there to work together in solidarity with one another. If there's no solidarity, then we cannot have justice. So our prayer, if we want peace, reach out to the poor and also have solidarity. Next. Violence and discrimination against women is a threat to human dignity. Big problem we are facing there, the whole of Asia and also in India. Discrimination and neglect are threatening women's survival, where women suffers from the world's lowest political representation, employment and property ownership. In countries India, Indonesia, Malaysia, estimates show the GDP would increase by 2 to 4% if women employment rate were raised up. Some studies have been shown. Next. South Asian women can expect to die 5 years earlier than their men. So, and more women die in childbirth there, 500 for every 100,000 live births. China and India account for more than 85 million of the 100 million missing women. Many women are missing who have died from discriminatory treatment or lack of nutrition or because they were never born in the first place. Very sad. As India celebrates now, is going to celebrate now in January, its 69th Republic Day, thousands of children continue to fall prey to trafficking. Yet another big disaster in India. 3 million sex workers in India, 40% are below the age of 18. At this rate, by 2025, we are talking about the future. Something to be good, we are hoping that yesterday. But now, in the future, 1 out of every 5 girls could end up in the flesh trade. Every day, 200 girls and women enter prostitution in India. That's a mild figure. Of the 30 lakh prostitutes, 40% are children. Human trafficking is the third biggest illegal business in India after arms and drugs. Widespread trafficking of boys also. And according to ILO, 1.2 million children are trafficked each year. Now I come to the point. The main reason for trafficking is poverty. And that's now the thing what we have to do. The link between poverty and trafficking. The thing is how to overcome poverty. Here's one of the issues. Interstate trafficking accounts for 89% in India. These are the states, Bihar, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, produce the largest number of minor girls. Sex tourism, exploitation of young boys, especially street children, is increasing. Trafficking is a violation of human rights. Next. Victims of trafficking suffer from physical abuse, mental abuse, social stigmatization. And so empowering women is vital for achieving development goals. So we now are doing training programs for women to see that they're not trafficked. We're doing good touch, bad touch for schoolgirls and various other programs, education programs, where they realize their rights and how people cannot just take them for a ride. Gender policies also we are having. We have the CBCI, Catholic Bishops' Conference, the gender policy, that equality and dignity of all persons on the basis for just human society, especially the concerns of women who are marginalized and oppressed. Next. There are women empowerment programs conducted all over the country with increased onslaught of women, onslaught on women through rape, abduction, domestic violence, dowry deaths, etc., etc. That's what we have. Next point is the caste division. One question came across yesterday at the introduction when we spoke about, remember, about the caste and Dalit caste. Somebody asked me yesterday. So there is another threat to spirituality and solidarity. Now we see that Christian population is just 2.3% of the total population of the comprising of the religious there, and a major portion of Indian Christian population is the Dalit tribals and the backward castes. So between 2/3 and 3/4 of all Christians in India are Dalits. Dalit Christians are the majority in the Catholic Church and comprise 14 million, more than 14 million, and 37 are below the poverty line. So Dalit, who is the Dalit? Those people who are outside the 4 castes, I said yesterday, they are called the 5th caste or Panchamas. They are considered ritually unclean, untouchable. I added this point because the question came yesterday. They are forced to live in the peripheries, outside villages or slums. They are not to drink from the same teacups in the tea shop. They are not to use the same wells or drink from the same water pots as those belonging to a caste. And they were given the most menial tasks, sweeping the streets, skinning dead animals, removing excrement from toilets, often with bare hands. And every 2 hours, a Dalit is assaulted. Every day, 3 Dalit women are raped, 2 Dalits murdered, 11 are beaten, 2 Dalits burnt. This is the statistics. Now here we have there lot of other issues I just do not want to go into it, and untouchability, etc. Next slide, please. Dalit children have to sit separately eating in government schools, denied access to water, etc. And women face sexual abuse, harassment, violence, prostitution. Next. Let's go on next. Next. Now, many seminars and conferences we have had there. Dalit empowerment, there's a policy in India now, trying to fight for their rights. Last point, farmers' livelihood. 1.9 farmers commit suicide in India, has committed suicide between these years. They leave behind families, going further into poverty. No one to work in the fields, tragic phenomenon. Next. It's due to increased indebtedness, rising costs of production, and that's a big problem. Next. Suicide statistics of farmers going faster. So is there hope for our farmers? So one way could be new farming techniques, moving from unfair trade to proper trade. Next, ways to increase productivity, new ways. We can teach them, we're teaching them new ways, farmers. A lot of programs are having for farmers, helping them. Next, new methods for farmers. Then I come now, conclusion. Some good practices which we have taken, we have done. Restoring, number 1, child's right to education. 2, forming self-help groups to improve livelihoods of illiterates. Helping the poor, 3, and weaker sections of society. Training youth for entrepreneurship, development, career advancement. I'll come to this point in the question session. 5, mitigation of scarcity of water to NRM, that's Natural Resource Management. 6, hunger march we have done to help the poor and human rights rallies. 7, we celebrate Human Rights Day, International Women's Day, Earth Day. 8, training on disaster management. 9, workshop for peace activists. We are forming peace clubs, peace circles everywhere to spread peace. 10, training people in conflict resolution. 11, safe motherhood and child health, because of a lot of diseases young mothers have. 12, preparing youth for competitive exams, Indian Administrative Service, IPS, again this point number 12, I'll come in the discussion. 13, promoting kitchen gardening. 14, detection of malnutrition, because malnutrition is one of the biggest causes of poverty in India. And 15, Bombay is considered the world's capital of HIV/AIDS, enhancing HIV/AIDS education among students in schools and colleges. So some other practices that we have been carrying out so far. Conclusion, first, change in lifestyle we call for. We must change our lifestyle, each and every one of us, because we have to save the good earth. 2, I'm going faster, I go to 2, change in attitude, our attitude to the poor, our attitude to development, our attitude and way of thinking we have to change. Next, I come last, change our relationship to work. How we can work today in today's world is not like how we worked before. We must really love what work we do, and we must counter all those forces which are working against our peace efforts. So with that, friends, I end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm exhausted listening to you. Anyway, thank you very much. The thing that came through to me very strongly also, is, as you mentioned many times, was peace through justice and solidarity. And there's many witnesses to that we have, not just in the Catholic Church, but also in the Hindu tradition and also the Muslim tradition. So that's important. Now, I'd like to introduce to you Cesar de Mello, who is in the Australian, from Australia, Pax Christi, Australia. I've never met Cesar until here, but his reputation has preceded him. Cesar is a consultant on third world development and equity concerns, including climate change and tourism. Has organised and co-edited Deconstructing Tourism, Who Benefits? A theological reading from the Global South. He seems to be very passionate in all these areas and relates with numerous ecumenical, interfaith, peace and justice advocacy groups. He's consultant to the Asia Pacific Assembly of the YMCA Global Alternative Tourism Network, which I hope he might mention somewhere along the line, because I think it's very exciting. He was formerly National Director of the Christian World Service in Australia, the Aid and Development Agency of the National Council of Churches in Australia, and the Ecumenical Coalition on Tourism when he was based in Thailand. I hand you over now to Cesar. Thank you.
preparing this paper, I started. Am I on? Yeah.
Yes.
In preparing this paper, I stuck religiously to the instructions given, which is stay within 15 minutes. So I'll try my best. The topic being what it was a bit differently expressed in terms of what we do in Australia. We don't, as Pax Christi Australia, we don't really work in the field of affluence and all that, but we work in the fields of how the impact of affluence can be felt in the different communities we work with within Australia. To be honest, when I came to this meeting place, and when I saw the grandeur of Discovery Suites, I was saying, what am I doing here? A temple of affluence. And I'm going to speak about challenging affluence and overcoming poverty. Then I reflected and I said, that's what St. Paul did. He took the message right to the agora, the marketplace, where the powerful were, and talked to them. And beyond that, I realized that actually this is a good place to talk about affluence. Not only because this seems to be a very affluent place, but barely 10 minutes from here in either direction, you're going to see a Manila which is very different to what is presented here. So I felt a bit at ease that I can stay in this place. I'm going to basically follow my paper, and as I said, I'll begin with a quote from a favorite poet. Before all else, I will restate my conviction that a world economic system that discards men, women, and children because they are no longer considered useful or productive according to criteria drawn from the world of business or other organizations is unacceptable because it is inhumane. This lack of concern for persons is a sign of regression and dehumanization in any political or economic system, Pope Francis. We are talking about affluence. I thought it might be worthwhile to give some sort of an overview of what the nature of affluence. And most of the stuff I'm going to present is, coming from research, from academics, and so on. The underlying reality of affluence is that poverty is not an accident. Welcome to the Asia-Pacific region, or as is now becoming fashionable, the Indo-Pacific region. See, the geopolitical concerns of late are beginning to redefine this region less as Asia-Pacific and more as Indo-Pacific. And the idea behind Indo-Pacific is to give more prominence to the Indian reality, the Indian Ocean, the Indian nation, and so on, partly. And this is coming as a result of the work from the big powers. You have US involved there, Japan involved there, Australia involved there, and India. And they're calling it Indo-Pacific because it diminishes the importance of China. So this is a way to contain China. So you're going to hear more and more of the Indo-Pacific region as opposed to the Asia-Pacific. This is interesting. On the one hand, we had a picture of India as described by my friend over here as to the different aspects of Indian poverty, etc. And yet, India is playing a key role in the geopolitical sense, as a rising power, as a space power, as a military power, etc. So you have this contradiction. This Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific region is a massive region which includes several of the major world economies and carries more than 60% of the world's population of 7.5 billion. A defining feature of our societies is that they are marked by striking disparities in the distribution of income, resources, and opportunities. The eyesore of the extreme wealth of a few and the many near and below the poverty line continues. We heard figures about poverty figures in India, Asia, Africa. And what is the poverty line? $85 a day. If you are able, no matter how, if you are able to manage, whether in cash, whether in food, whether in this, whether etc., manage to live in a particular day, the equivalent of $85. So in rupees, it works out to 65, 70 rupees. In pesos, it works out to something like 40 or 50 pesos. If you can manage to get that amount of whatever, you are above the poverty line. And the reason why the poverty line is set so low is because of the powers, the interest in different countries that wanted to keep the poverty line as low as possible. Because any higher, a $10 poverty line would cost the budget. And the budget would then have to take money from somewhere else. So the UN, which wanted to have a higher poverty line, agreed to this miserable, indefensible poverty line of $85. And in India, it's $25. They even managed to reduce it. So that's a poverty line. Now, as far back, there continues to be with us despite the much ballyhooed UN decades of development. Those of you who were around a few decades ago would have known about this UN decades of development. In the 60s, Swedish economists Gunnar and Alva Myrdal, husband and wife, highlighted what we are seeing today. In 1975, a Canadian theologian, economist, theologian, Ralph Dickinson, wrote a landmark analysis, Many Poor Making Few Rich, for the World Council of Churches Assembly in Nairobi, that gave a profound insight into this phenomenon. Fast forward to today, and the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers expose how the very well-to-do are able to arrange their financial affairs with the assistance of tax havens to minimize, if not extinguish, their payment of tax in their countries of domicile. When the World Economic Forum met in Davos earlier this year, Oxfam presented research which showed that globally, the wealth of some 60 or so individuals is equivalent to that of half the entire world's population. And some of these great individuals live in Asia Pacific. There are many ways to amassing disproportionate levels of wealth, mostly aided by ineffective legal systems, close relationships between the privileged and the political and economic leaderships, weak governments, corrupt and or powerless bureaucracies, and sadly, a feeling of hopelessness of large segments of the population. The French economist, perhaps you're familiar with his work, Thomas Piketty, wrote a massive work just 2 or 3 years ago called Capital in the 21st Century. And he has shown that the powerful and the well-connected benefit from the strategic exploitation of a taxation system that structurally favors their interests, enabling them to avoid their fair share of taxes and even any tax. In a whole variety of businesses, business and economic sectors, ranging from agriculture, tourism, etc., the decision-making advantages the privileged with an open-door access to the opportunities available that may not be enjoyed by the common people. When the lion's share of income, resources, and other forms of power is enjoyed by a minority, many are left to share what remains. Poverty is no accident. It is the result of the many deliberate and public choices made in society. Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz describing such a situation in America and elsewhere says this situation is government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. Inequality is rife in our region. Even the World Bank has come around to the view that inequality reduces growth and productivity in society. This is obvious to all of us even from a cursory observations. But for the World Bank, it took them 3 decades of research to come to this. And even today, as was pointed out yesterday in some discussion, there are more than a few elements in the World Bank that do not want to accept this understanding. They believe, let the economy grow and everything will follow. In Australia, as far back as 1992, after extensive research, the Australian Catholic bishops issued a major statement, Commonwealth for the Common Good. It stressed the fundamental Christian values of inclusiveness, with the economy serving all members of society, not just the elites. Since then, Australia has enjoyed uninterrupted growth, just having overtaken Netherlands as the country with the longest recession-free period, 25 years. And the economists and others that support them, they glory in the fact that we have had 25 years recession-free. The rest of the world was damned by the global financial crisis, etc., etc., etc. But we in Australia escaped recession. Nevertheless, over the same period, the richest 20% have increased their wealth by 28%, as opposed to just 3% by those at the bottom. Incidentally, I have just put there a few copies of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Australia, their latest statement, which is out there for those who want to have a copy of it. I could not bring more than that. In Australia, the ever unquenchable thirst for more and more wealth, the unstoppable acquisitiveness, and the accompanying spike in ostentatious consumption are often facetiously grouped under the phenomenon of affluenza. Call it affluenza. In fact, there are quite a few books with that title. Play on influenza, but it's worse. The impact of affluence does not, unfortunately, and this is where we come into the wider play of affluence. The impact of affluence does not end just at the economic border. Those who exercise it can and do shape society. We expect all citizens to have an equal influence and say in government policies and decisions. This would provide the ground for an ideal economy. However, research has shown, as in the United States and elsewhere, that policy makers, our government, are influenced greatly by the expressed or intuitive preferences of the economically advantaged. There is often a correlation between the preferences of the elites and policy outcomes supposedly arrived at a democratic process in democratic countries or through autocratic say-sos in other countries. In other words, affluence often goes hand in hand with a dispensation shaped by economic and political assumptions, calculations, and structures that reflect and benefit the interests and agendas of the powerful as opposed to those of the excluded. As we increasingly appreciate and adopt the values of sustainability, such affluence is unsustainable, as within the operation of a neoliberal system, it is based on the exclusion of many. To ensure the steady flow of benefits emerging from the prevailing dispensation, those enjoying these benefits could either be supportive or unbothered by government policies that negatively impact on others in the community. Why would somebody who benefits from a government challenge that government over those policies that impact on other people. And I am benefiting from that government. So, the desire for an exploding personal or corporate bank surplus is a powerful motive to let sleeping dogs lie and not be concerned by how the marginalized are affected. And that's where the context of Pax Christi Australia is how and where the marginalized are impacted through policies that arise from governments not interested. And so that's where it is. Pax Christi Australia is deeply conscious that Australia is part of a rapidly changing world, globalizing yet tribalizing, increasingly vulnerable, struggling with growing inequalities of power and wealth as the global power shift is occurring. We talked about the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. It is a challenging world wherein, especially in the first world, political and public life is less attuned to ethical discourse. And one of the explanations of the rise of Trump is, which applies around the world, is that the foundations of greed is good was laid in the 90s. I'm not talking of the greed is good notion of Deng Xiaoping that he popularized in the late 70s, which led to China to become what it is today. But in the US and other economies related to the US, the 90s were the nurturing ground for this attitude that greed is good. And over time, that attitude festered, developed, was nurtured, was increasing. And in fact, there was a very famous movie called Wall Street, where the expression greed is good became, an aphorism to defend wealth and so on. And Trump was nurtured in that climate. But at the same time, others were nurtured in that same climate. So when Trump became what he became, the president, he had a captive segment in America that supported that kind of attitude. So no matter how much you challenge Trump on what he said about women, etc., there was a big base that supported him on this economic understanding of where we should be, and therefore all that individualism and so on. Recently I came across the title of an international church ecumenical consultation that best encapsulates our call as Pax Christi. And Valentina referred to it yesterday, an unchanging mission in an ever-changing generation. So that's where we are. As we look to the times ahead, we take encouragement from and will build on the charisms Pax Christi Australia has brought to its work of peace over more than 40 years. Worth noting, as Dr. Joe Camilleri, some of you asked me about him, one of the founding visionaries has identified the four charisms in a spirit of inclusiveness, pursuing our peacemaking vision ecumenically and through deepening our interfaith connections. A further evolution into interbelief dialogue with people of goodwill who have a deep commitment to justice and peace, but no religious affiliation, may now be an appropriate next step. In Australia, we have an expression called SBNR. As I was saying to some friends yesterday, the percentage of church-going Catholics, Anglicans, uniting, etc. is now right down to the shoelaces. 7–8% if you're lucky within the Catholic Church, 12% if you're lucky within the Catholic Church, similar numbers among the other churches. But 60–70% in different surveys saying we are SBNR, spiritual but not religious. And that's a big segment. And maybe that's the one we need to tap because, as people of goodwill. we have to ask whether unfettered affluence is an obstacle to peace and justice. Number two, striving to speak truth to power respectfully, clearly, and faithfully. We've been willing to say the uncomfortable things, whether it be in the church or secular arena, but that is not easy. Because some of the quote-unquote enemies and blocks we identified today are in the church itself. So we don't have to go far to find some of our, roadblocks. We regarded respectful dialogue as a key to peacemaking and coalition building, developing insights and experience along the way on how to build and maintain coalitions and keeping them on track. Underpinning the above four charisms is the Pax Christi international approach of study, prayer and action, which has been adopted by Pax Christi Australia and provides a basis for an ongoing innovation. As multicultural Australia, and Australia is multicultural, almost half the population of Australia were either born outside Australia or had parents who were born outside Australia. So it's a very multicultural, I think it's the second most multicultural society after Israel. But Israel is a small population, whereas Australia is about 24 million now. As multicultural Australia continually keeps evolving and the community is faced with an assortment of challenges, deemed unimportant or ignored within an economic template that grants little priority to the lives of those impacted by the decision and predilections of those in power who are, quote unquote, delivering on good economics. The Pax Christi playbook looks varied indeed. Pax Christi maintains its focus on peace through educational and other activities by drawing attention to the destructiveness of war as opposed to peaceful methods of conflict resolutions. We rejoiced in the fact some time ago, weeks ago, that ICAN, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, now a network of 130 plus NGOs worldwide, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for 2017. ICAN was pioneered in Melbourne, and Pax Christi Australia has been its constant supporter from the very beginning. However, it is a matter of regret that our government, while our government is lockstep with the US government and many of the policies and positions as a way to quote unquote to achieve a stable and prosperous world, our government has not acknowledged the achievement of ICAN. Completely ignored. Unless, yeah. So, we wish to support ICAN and others in pressuring the Australian government to sign the treaty banning nuclear weapons. The Anzac Centenary, moving on, commemorating the landing of Australian and New Zealand forces in Gallipoli, Turkey, has provided us with points of entry in collaboration with other peace networks and like-minded groups to reflect with the community along the lines of whither Australia, who are we, who might we become, can we change directions? Moving on now. For some time now we have been paying particular attention to supporting Muslim communities, and they face the impact of poverty in so many ways, including the poverty by exclusion. We are concerned that the Australian Islamic communities continue to be under increasing pressure from right-wing politicians and their followers, and their life is made a misery by people like Pauline Hanson. I'm sure you're familiar with that name, Pauline Hanson. Moving on, the horror of refugee asylum seeker detention does not go away. As the Australian government continues to be wedded to the principle of we will determine who comes to our shores and the circumstances of their coming, refugees are treated abominably despite the conventions and protections provided by the UN and international law. Moving on, we could have